Imagine a world torn apart by war. One 17-year-old awaits her fate in a dungeon where children and peers are mutilated, literally harvested for body parts to make magical compounds for a trove of brutal witches and wizards. Looming in the background are the ghosts of forgotten gods whose gigantic ferocity is now merely a shadow of what they once were. This is the world of Monstress. Hello comic book junkies, it's the Frog Queen here, and today I'm going to explain why I think you should read Monstress, the epic comic book fantasy series. Epic fantasy being a subgenre of fantasy defined by the epic nature, that being a lengthy narrative involving a time beyond living memory in which occurred extraordinary doings of extraordinary people who have dealings with gods or other supernatural forces which give shape to the moral universe of their descendants. Wow, what a mouthful. That last bit is courtesy of Wikipedia, of course. Monstress was first published in November 2015 by Image Comics and is written by Marjorie Liu, who previously most known for her work in Marvel Comics such as X-23, Dark Wolverine, and The Astonishing X-Men. And Monstress is drawn by Sana Takeda, who also had a slew of Marvel projects like Civil War, Venom, and the highly praised Miss Marvel series. Monstress is an ongoing series to this day, date of this video being June 2019, and right now spanning 3 volumes available, which are actually very large volumes. Rather than the average 4 to 5 small issues, the first volume collects 6 issues, which includes that extended debut issue of 58 pages. Currently, there are issues 19 to 22, which can be picked up at your local comic book shop as floppies. The collected edition of Volume 4 will be made available at a comic shop near you on July 5th of this year. Monstress has been praised as fitting in the ranks of such high fantasy as the likes of George R. R. Martin, and even endorsed by the likes of Neil Gaiman. The book has also won 5 Eisner Awards and 3 Hugo Awards. But what sets Monstress apart from other high fantasy comic book epics? One important difference here is that the book is set in a matriarchal world. A matriarchy being a system in which females hold the position of power. Hey, and not one mention of periods so far. The story centers on protagonist Myka, half-wolf. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but for now I'm just going to call her Myka. She's an active warrior in the war between the Arcanics, which are magical creatures who sometimes can pass for humans, but usually look like their animal ancestors, and the Kumeia, don't know if I'm pronouncing that right as well, an order of sorceresses who consume the bodies of Arcanics to fuel their power. One of the big differences in Monstress compared to other high fantasy epics is, in fact, our character Myka herself. She is essentially a selfishly motivated protagonist, and she's pretty damn unlikable. Although we can find sympathy for her situation, she's a highborn girl turned soldier, then slave, and also an amputee, we struggle to find anything likable about her. She's arrogant, hot-tempered, aggressive, snide, and outside of a few emotions such as anger and resentment, she remains fairly emotionless, and that includes expressionless. You could almost classify her as a 90s anti-hero by her actions, for instance the way she almost begrudgingly saves the children she's imprisoned with in the beginning of the story. However, her liberation of them seems almost coincidental, as it wasn't really her true intention. We learn that Myka intentionally got herself put in the cells and then frees herself while trying to utilize her hidden powers, the likes of which she doesn't even understand at this point. Her heroism is almost a byproduct of her quest. We see this in the many ways she rather selfishly shrugs off her companion Kippa, the little fox Arcanic, who is freed in the prisons and becomes a traveling partner and useful companion. Myka seems to allow Kippa to accompany her, more so due to her usefulness rather than any real obligation to protect her. Myka is a bit of a rare character in terms of high fantasy and female protagonists alike. Rather than the typical righteous female hero, she's consumed with pursuing clues left by her mother's work to unlock secrets about herself and her mother, and find out her mother's true intentions. Myka also lacks the usual matronly characteristics so many female characters are given in these stories. All these aspects of her, or lack thereof, make Myka stand out as a rare female protagonist, and essentially not a hero at all. Anti-heroes had pretty much fallen out of fashion in comics after the 90s. We had seen so many great anti-heroes, most notably and popular Wolverine from Marvel Comics. Unlike Wolverine, Myka, thus far, doesn't so much seem to be governed by a will to do what's right, but rather stay the course on her quest, which is completely self-concerned. This brings us to Kippa, our lovable child fox character who has her own talents. She offsets all the self-importance and unlikable qualities of Myka by being wholly good and selfless. She regularly sacrifices her own bodily integrity to help others, and she's loyal to a fault, even to people who fail to return her loyalty. That, and she's just plain adorable. As with much high fantasy, the world of Monstress is lavishly detailed with rich history imparted to the reader throughout the story, but also at the end of each issue. We hear from the archival research of the esteemed Professor Tam Tam, former first record keeper of the Ishami Temple and learned contemporary of Namron Blackclaw, which can be assumed that he's a necromancer. A Necomancer, actually. The cat race is by far the most interesting in the book, as they are a contrived species of ultra-intelligent magic cats. Cats are said to be the followers of the god Ubasti, who is seen as a demon more so than a god by the humans and Arcanics alike. The cat race is unique from the Kumeya and Arcanics. They are powerful and known as Necomancers, a playful mashing of the words Neko, Japanese for cat, and necromancer, someone who communicated with the dead, often in fantasy, even raising the dead for their own uses. Although cats are reviled by other species as cunning tricksters who could hypnotize you with their eyes, this is true in medieval lore throughout our own world, cats in the books are not exactly all the same and have different motivations as well as different levels of skill. In the story, cats with more than one tail are said to have more power. Cats are by far the most interesting species and ultimately one of the pieces of this world that I actually fell in love with first. It's important to note that this series is aimed at a somewhat mature readership. I think a teenager could very well read this series, but due to its brutality and the violence, this isn't recommended for anyone under 13 in my opinion. There's also some foul language, which might upset some parents, but nothing in compared to the sheer horror of seeing a child torn apart for pieces on an operating slab, like in the very first issue. It's also very refreshing to see that this violent world isn't fraught with sexual violence. In fact, sexuality is a very fluid thing in this story, with homosexual characters depicted more often than heterosexual, and so far in the story to date, the book remains free of depicting sex of any kind. Instead, there are some implied panels which are depicting bedroom embraces with important existing and pre-existing relationships rather than erotic fan-serving moments. Much of this world is inspired by feudal Asia, and that's apparent in the richly textured clothing worn by the highborn characters, as well as in the architecture of the world. More to this, we see familiar dining experiences inspired by Japanese culture. Of course, artist Takeda is Japanese, which makes sense when looking at the artwork. To the average Western comic book consumer, the artwork looks familiarly manga-esque, yet clearly holds a sophistication fitting in with more adult manga rather than the bubblegum, too cute, Kodomo sort of manga aimed at children. In my opinion, Takeda's work has a level of sophistication and detail, the likes of which elevates her work into the ranks of Berserk's Kentaro Miura, for example. There is no question that Monstress is an artistic masterpiece with many panels that could convey the story without even words. Each character is conveyed in every panel without any uncertainty of their emotional state, sometimes through their facial expressions and other times through the setting. Half-Wolf is depicted walking through large empty temples when in her subconscious, imparting the sheer loneliness and isolation she feels as she's set apart from her peers by appearing completely human, unlike so many other Arcanics who bear the resemblance of their animal lineage. As you get to know Half-Wolf, you also learn about the harsh treatment and teachings she received from her mother and her resentments towards her. The giant walls around her in her subconscious represent the emotional walls built by her mother's constant lessons in hardening the young girl. Preparing her for what? Well, Half-Wolf doesn't really know, and that's the ultimate mystery which drives her to chase her mother's ghost around this treacherous world. There's so much more to this story involving things like cult-like conspiracy and forgotten gods working in the background to gain back their powers, but I don't want to spoil the adventure for you. You really need to experience this story for yourself. Well, I think that does it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you liked this video, and thank you for all your support. And until next time, read something good.